The concert was going full throttle. 18,000 people at Madison Square Garden were jumping to the rhythm of Kai's train. But in the middle of the stage, Ozzy Osbourne suddenly stopped. He signaled to cut the music. The band stopped playing. The massive stadium plunged into silence. 18,000 people waited in shock. Ozzy walked to the microphone, pointed his finger toward the middle of the crowd, and shouted in a harsh voice, "You, yes, you in the navy blue shirt. Leave that kid alone, or security will throw you out." Nobody understood what was happening. Was the Prince of Darkness rock and roll's wildest name, intervening in a bullying situation in the middle of his concert? What happened in the next 5 minutes would create one of rock history's most human moments. No one at Madison Square Garden that October evening in 2018 expected the concert to turn into a lesson in compassion and courage. Not the fans who had paid hundreds of dollars for tickets, not the crew who had set up the elaborate stage, and certainly not the 3 men in the crowd who thought no one would notice what they were doing to a teenage kid. But Ozzy Osbourne noticed, and he wasn't going to let it slide. October 12, 2018, Madison Square Garden, New York City. The venue was packed with 18,000 fans, all there to see the legendary Ozzy Osbourne on what he had announced would be his final tour. The No More Tours 2 farewell tour was a massive event, selling out venues across North America. The energy in the building was electric. Fans ranged from teenagers discovering Ozzy for the first time to 60-year-olds who had been following him since the Black Sabbath days. This was more than a concert, it was a celebration of 50 years of rock history. Backstage, Ozzy was going through his pre-show routine. At 69 years old, he didn't have the same energy he'd had in his 20s, but he was determined to give his fans everything he had. Sharon Osbourne, his wife and manager, was there, as always, making sure everything was perfect. "How are you feeling?" she asked him. "Like I'm about to walk into a lion's den," Ozzy replied with a grin. "Same as always." The show had started strong, opening with "Bark at the Moon." Ozzy had the crowd in the palm of his hand from the first note. His voice, weathered by decades of performing and living hard, still carried that distinctive power that had made him a legend. Song after song, the setlist moved through his greatest hits. Mr. Crowley had the entire arena holding up lighters and phone flashlights. Flying High Again got everyone jumping. Between songs, Ozzy bantered with the crowd, his Birmingham accent still thick after all these years in America. "New York City," he shouted. "You're still the loudest, craziest crowd in the world." The audience roared their approval. For most of them, this would be their last chance to see Ozzy live. They were determined to make it count. In the general admission pit near the front of the stage, a 17-year-old named Jake Matthews was having the time of his life. He'd saved up for months to afford the ticket. As a kid who'd struggled with social anxiety and stuttering, Ozzy's music had been his lifeline through some dark times. Tonight was a dream come true. Jake was small for his age, barely 5'6" and thin. He'd arrived early to get a good spot near the front. For the first hour of the concert, everything had been perfect. The people around him were friendly, all united by their love of the music. But then 3 men pushed their way into the space behind Jake. They were big guys, clearly drunk, aggressive in the way they moved through the crowd. One of them, wearing a navy blue shirt, immediately started complaining. "Why the hell is this kid here?" he said loudly to his friends. "This is a rock concert, not a daycare." Jake tried to ignore it. He focused on the stage, on Ozzy, on the music, but the comments kept coming. "Hey kid, you're too short. We can't see over you." Jake was confused. He was shorter than most people there. How could he be blocking anyone's view? Then came the first shove, not hard enough to knock him down, but enough to make him stumble forward. Jake turned around, his face flushing red. "Sorry," he stammered. "I didn't mean to." "Oh," he stutters. One of the men laughed. "That's precious. What's wrong, kid? Scared?" The people around them started to notice. Some looked uncomfortable, but didn't intervene. It was crowded, loud, and getting getting involved in someone else's problems seemed risky. Jake felt his throat tightening. This was his worst nightmare, being singled out, mocked for his speech impediment, unable to defend himself. He wanted to leave, but he was hemmed in by the crowd. There was nowhere to go. The band launched into Crazy Train, one of Ozzy's biggest hits. The crowd went wild, and in the chaos of everyone jumping and singing along, the harassment got worse. As Crazy Train played, Jake tried to lose himself in the music. He loved this song. He'd listened to it hundreds of times when he needed courage, but now, with these men behind him getting more aggressive, it was hard to focus. The guy in the navy blue shirt shoved Jake again, harder this time. "Move, kid. You're in our space." "I was here first," Jake managed to say, his stutter making the words difficult. "Oh, he talks," the man mocked. "Can barely get the words out, but he talks." His friends laughed. One of them spilled beer on Jake's back, whether accidentally or on purpose. Jake couldn't tell. A woman next to Jake looked at him with sympathy. "Are you okay?" she asked. Jake nodded, not trusting himself to speak without stuttering more. Tears were starting to form in his eyes, but he refused to cry. Not here, not at his first Ozzy concert. On stage, Ozzy was giving it his all. His band, Zakk Wylde on guitar, Blasco on bass, Tommy Clufetos on drums, were tight, powerful, professional. The sound filled every corner of Madison Square Garden, but something caught Ozzy's eye. In the sea of faces, in the general admission section, he noticed some kind of disturbance. As someone who'd performed thousands of concerts, he had developed an instinct for crowd dynamics. He could sense when something wasn't right. He continued singing, but his attention kept drifting to that area. There was a kid, young, small, and some bigger guys behind him seemed to be giving him trouble. Ozzy had seen this before. Bullies existed everywhere, even at rock concerts, maybe especially at rock concerts, where the chaos and darkness gave them cover to be cruel, and it pissed him off every single time. The song ended. The crowd applauded and cheered. Ozzy started to intro the next song, but he kept looking at that spot in the crowd, and then he saw it clearly. One of the men shoved the kid hard. The kid stumbled, nearly fell, caught himself at the last second. That was it. Ozzy had seen enough. He raised his hand, the universal signal for the band to stop. The musicians, confused but professional, immediately cut off. The intro to Paranoid that they'd just started died away. The crowd's noise died down too, gradually, as people realized something was wrong. Within seconds, Madison Square Garden went from deafening noise to stunned silence. 18,000 people held their breath. Ozzy walked to the front of the stage. He raised his hand to his eyes, squinting to see better into the crowd. Then he pointed directly at the section where Jake and his harassers stood. "You," Ozzy's voice boomed through the PA system. "Yes, you in the navy blue shirt. Leave that kid alone." The entire arena turned to look. Phones came out, recording. The three men froze, suddenly realizing that Ozzy Osbourne, on stage at Madison Square Garden, was calling them out specifically. Jake stood there, tears now openly streaming down his face, not from sadness but from shock and relief. Ozzy had noticed. The Prince of Darkness had seen what was happening and was doing something about it. The silence in Madison Square Garden was deafening. Everyone was trying to figure out what was happening. Security guards, alerted by Ozzy's call-out, were already moving toward the section where Jake stood. Ozzy wasn't done. He gripped the microphone tighter and spoke with a fury that was rarely heard in his voice outside of his music. "What kind of coward picks on a kid at a concert?" His Birmingham accent made the words hit even harder. "You think you're tough? You think pushing around someone half your size makes you a man?" The guy in the navy blue shirt tried to blend into the crowd, but it was too late. Everyone around him was pointing, staring. His friends looked uncomfortable, suddenly wanting to be anywhere else. Jake stood there, barely believing this was happening. He'd come to this concert hoping just to enjoy the music, maybe forget his problems for a few hours. He never imagined Ozzy Osbourne would stop his entire show to defend him. "That kid there," Ozzy pointed at Jake. "He paid good money to see this show. He's a fan." He has every right to be here, to enjoy the music, to have a good time, and you're ruining it for him. Why? Because you're drunk? Because you're miserable? Because you think it's fun to make someone else feel small? The crowd started to react. At first, there were murmurs. Then someone started booing the bullies. Then more people joined in. Within seconds, 18,000 people were booing, directing their anger at the three men who had been harassing Jake. But Ozzy raised his hand again. The booing stopped. "No," he said. "We're not going to boo. We're not going to be like them. We're better than that." He turned his attention back to the three men. Security had reached them now, and the guy in the navy blue shirt was being escorted out. His friends followed, heads down, clearly ashamed. As they were being removed, Ozzy said into the microphone, "You don't deserve to be at a rock concert. Rock and roll is about freedom, about being yourself, about finding your people. It's not about making others feel like shit because you feel like shit." The arena erupted in applause, not for the removal of the bullies, but for Ozzy's words. People were cheering, whistling, screaming their approval. Jake stood there, wiping tears from his face, overwhelmed by what was happening. People around him were patting him on the back, asking if he was okay. The woman who'd asked earlier gave him a hug. Perfect strangers were rallying around him. But Ozzy still wasn't done. He looked directly at Jake. Even from the stage, even in the massive arena, their eyes met. "Kid," Ozzy said, his voice softer now. "What's your name?" Jake's throat seized up. He couldn't speak. His stutter always got worse when he was emotional, and right now he was more emotional than he'd ever been in his life. Someone near Jake shouted up to the stage, "His name is Jake. Jake Matthews." Ozzy nodded. "Jake, you all right, mate?" Jake nodded vigorously, unable to speak, but trying to communicate his gratitude. "Listen to me, Jake," Ozzy said, and now his voice carried a weight that went beyond the immediate situation. "I know what it's like to be different. I know what it's like to be bullied. When I was a kid in Birmingham, I had dyslexia, couldn't read properly, couldn't write. Kids called me stupid. Teachers gave up on me. I was told I'd never amount to anything." The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word. "But you know what I learned?" Ozzy continued. "The people who try to make you feel small, they're the ones who are actually small inside. They're scared, they're hurting, and they're trying to make you hurt too, because misery loves company." He paused, letting that sink in. "But you don't have to accept that. You don't have to let them win. You find your music, whatever that is. You find the thing that makes you feel strong, and you hold on to it. For me, it was this." He gestured to the stage, the instruments, the crowd. "It was music, and music brought me here, to this moment where I can stand on this stage and tell you, you're worth more than how those idiots treated you." The applause that followed Ozzy's words was unlike anything the venue had heard that night. It wasn't just appreciation for a performance. It was gratitude, recognition, a collective acknowledgement of a profound truth. People near Jake were cheering for him specifically. Someone lifted him onto their shoulders so Ozzy could see him better. Jake, overwhelmed and crying, waved at the stage. Ozzy smiled, a genuine, warm smile that was rarely captured in photos or videos, but that those who knew him personally saw often. "There he is. That's the kid. Give him a round of applause." The entire arena erupted again. Jake had gone from being bullied and humiliated to being celebrated by 18,000 people and Ozzy Osbourne himself. The shift was surreal, almost impossible to process. Sharon Osbourne, watching from the side of the stage, had tears in her eyes. In 40 years of managing Ozzy, she'd seen him do countless generous things: charity work, visiting sick children, donating money. But this was different. This was spontaneous, unscripted, raw compassion. Ozzy addressed the crowd one more time. "And the rest of you, all 18,000 of you beautiful people, I want to say thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting Jake. And thank you for reminding me why I do this. It's not about the money or the fame or any of that shit. It's about this." He gestured between himself and the crowd. "This connection, this community." He paused, then added with a slight grin, "And now, if it's all right with everyone, I'd like to get back to the concert. Jake, this next song is for you, mate. It's called Mama, I'm Coming Home." The band started the intro to one of Ozzy's most emotional songs, a ballad he'd written for Sharon. But tonight, it had new meaning. It was for Jake, for everyone who'd ever felt lost or alone, for everyone who needed a reminder that they belonged. As Ozzy sang, people in the crowd recorded the moment on their phones. The videos would be online within minutes. By the next morning, the story would be everywhere. News sites, social media, music blogs. Ozzy stops concert to defend Bullied fan would trend worldwide. Jake stood in the crowd, surrounded by new friends, listening to Ozzy sing directly to him. The pain of the earlier harassment was still there, but it was overshadowed now by something stronger. The feeling of being seen, of being protected, of mattering. When the song ended, Ozzy looked back at Jake one more time and gave him a thumbs up. Jake returned it, a huge smile on his face. The rest of the concert was electric. The energy had shifted from just a great rock show to something more meaningful. People felt connected, not just to the music or to Ozzy, but to each other. They'd witnessed something special, something that reminded them of the best parts of humanity. After the concert, Jake stood outside Madison Square Garden, still processing what had happened. People kept coming up to him, asking if he was okay, congratulating him, taking photos with him. He'd come to the concert alone and unknown. He was leaving with dozens of new friends. A woman from Ozzy's management team found him in the crowd. Jake Matthews. He nodded, wondering if he was in trouble somehow. Mr. and Mrs. Osbourne would like to meet you backstage. Would you come with me? Jake's eyes went wide. Really? They want to meet me? Yes. They want to make sure you're okay. Jake followed her through the venue's corridors, past security checkpoints, into the backstage area. His heart was pounding. Meeting Ozzy Osbourne, actually meeting him, not just seeing him on stage, was beyond anything he'd imagined. Sharon Osbourne met him first. She gave him a warm hug, something that surprised Jake, but that he desperately needed. "We're so sorry that happened to you," she said. "Are you all right?" I'm okay," Jake managed. Thank you so much." "You don't need to thank us, honey." Those men were completely out of line. Ozzy couldn't just stand there and watch. Then Ozzy himself came around the corner. He was smaller in person than he seemed on stage, older, more tired looking, but his eyes were kind. "Jake, mate," Ozzy said, extending his hand. "Glad to properly meet you." Jake shook his hand, starstruck.
Mr. Osbourne, I don't know what to say. What you did out there.
"It was just the right thing," Ozzy interrupted gently. "Nobody should treat you that way. Nobody." They talked for about 15 minutes. Ozzy asked about Jake's life, his interests, his struggles with stuttering. He shared his own experiences with dyslexia and ADHD, how he'd been made to feel stupid his whole childhood. "The thing is," Ozzy said, "the world's going to try to make you feel like you don't belong, like you're not good enough because you're different. But that's bullshit. Your differences, your struggles, they're what make you who you are. And who you are is pretty bloody great." Before Jake left, Sharon gave him her personal email. "If you ever need anything, if anyone bothers you again, you contact us. You're part of our family now." Ozzy signed a guitar pick and gave it to Jake. "Keep this, and remember tonight. Not the bad parts, the good parts. Remember that 18,000 people stood up for you. Remember that your hero cared enough to stop his show. Remember that you matter."
Jake left backstage floating on air. The guitar pick was clutched in his hand like it was made of gold.
By the next morning, the videos had been viewed millions of times. Major news outlets picked up the story. Rock legend Ozzy Osbourne stops concert to defend Bullied teen. Ran on CNN, BBC, Rolling Stone, and countless other platforms. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Fans praised Ozzy for using his platform to stand up against bullying. Anti-bullying organizations reached out, wanting to partner with him on awareness campaigns. Parents wrote emails thanking him for being a role model. But there was also another side to the story. The three men who had been removed removed from the concert, became internet famous for all the wrong reasons. Their identities were discovered through social media. Their employers were contacted. There were consequences. The guy in the navy blue shirt, his name was Derek Thompson, issued a public apology a week later. "I was drunk and stupid," he wrote on Facebook. "There's no excuse for how I treated that kid. I'm ashamed of myself. I'm getting help for my drinking problem, and I want Jake to know I'm truly sorry." It was hard to say if he was genuinely remorseful or just trying to salvage his reputation, but at least he acknowledged what he'd done. Jake's life changed dramatically after that night. He was interviewed by local news stations, invited to speak at anti-bullying events, even offered a chance to meet other musicians who'd heard his story. But more importantly, his confidence grew. The experience taught him that standing up for yourself or having someone stand up for you could make a difference. He started a YouTube channel where he talked about stuttering, anxiety, and bullying. His openness and vulnerability resonated with thousands of other young people going through similar struggles.
6 months after the concert, Jake received a package. Inside was a letter from Ozzy and Sharon, along with a brand new guitar.
The letter read, "Jake, we've been following your journey and we're so proud of you. You've taken what was a terrible experience and turned it into something positive. You're helping people. That's what rock and roll is really about, connecting people, making them feel less alone, giving them strength. This guitar is for you. Learn to play it, write your own songs, tell your own story. The world needs to hear it. You're a fighter, Jake. Don't ever forget that. With love, Ozzy and Sharon." Jake learned to play that guitar. He wrote his first song, called "The Prince of Darkness Saved Me," about the night at Madison Square Garden. He posted it on YouTube, and it was viewed over 1 million times. The incident also sparked broader conversations about concert safety and crowd behavior. Venues started training their security staff to watch for bullying and harassment in crowds. Bands and artists began speaking out more frequently about creating safe spaces at their shows. Ozzy himself incorporated a message into his remaining tour dates. Before starting his encores, he'd address the crowd. "This is a place for everyone. No matter who you are, what you look like, how you talk, you belong here. And if I see anyone messing with that, we're going to have a problem." The crowds always cheered in response, because that's what most people wanted anyway. A space where they could enjoy music without fear, where differences were celebrated rather than mocked. The story of that October night in Madison Square Garden became more than just a viral moment. It became a case study in the power of standing up, speaking out, and using your platform for good. Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness, the man who'd bitten heads off bats and doves, the controversial figure parents had warned their children about for decades, had revealed his true nature. He was someone who cared deeply about protecting the vulnerable. Today, Jake Matthews is 22 years old. He's studying psychology in college, specializing in trauma and resilience. He still stutters sometimes, but it doesn't define him anymore. He speaks at schools and conferences about bullying, confidence, and the importance of standing up for others. He keeps that guitar pick from Ozzy in a frame on his desk. Next to it is a photo from backstage that night. Him and Ozzy both smiling, both connected by an experience that changed them both. "People ask me if I'm mad about what happened that night," Jake says when he tells the story. "About the bullying, about being harassed, and honestly, I'm not. Because what came after was so much more powerful than what came before. I learned that there are people who will stand up for you, that you're never as alone as you think you are, and that sometimes your heroes really do notice you." The lesson from that night extends beyond Jake's personal story. It's a reminder that small acts of courage can have enormous impacts. Ozzy could have ignored what he saw. He could have let security handle it quietly. He could have finished the show without drawing attention to the problem. But he didn't. He stopped everything, called it out, and made it clear that such behavior wasn't acceptable. And in doing so, he taught 18,000 people and eventually millions more through the videos that speaking up matters, that using your voice, your platform, your moment of power to protect someone who needs it is always the right choice. If this story moved you, if it reminded you to stand up for others, to speak out when you see injustice, to use whatever platform you have, no matter how small, to make the world a little bit better, then share it, because somewhere right now, there's someone being bullied, someone feeling small and alone, someone who needs to know that people care, and they need to see that even the Prince of Darkness himself stops everything when he sees someone in need. Be someone's Ozzy. Stand up. Speak out. Make it clear that cruelty has no place in your presence, because you never know whose life you might change with a single act of courage.